Thanks for joining us today. I'm Helen Jung. I'm the opinion editor with the Oregonian. And Laura Gunderson, who's also on the editorial board, is on this call. We're meeting with candidates for Democratic candidates for House District 28. And just want to ask you both to start off by telling us a little bit about yourselves and why you're running for this office and why you think you're the best candidate. And why don't we start with Alisa and go in alphabetical order?
Okay, great. And thank you for having me here today. So I'm Alisa Blum, and I am running for state representative so that I can bring the skills and experiences that I have acquired over my 36-year career. I started my career as a social worker, working with kids and families who are having mental health issues. I also worked in the child welfare arena with children that had been removed from their homes because of child abuse and neglect, both as a therapist and as a participant in permanency planning meetings to determine a permanency plan for children who had been removed from their homes. I also ran a graduate social work training program. And for over 20 years, I've had my own small business. I'm a workplace improvement specialist, and I have worked with employees from all industry sectors across Oregon to help them improve communication, improve team building, improve problem solving, conflict resolution, been involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I am here today because I have the skills and experience to navigate through these difficult times that we're in. And we need leaders with the kind of skills that I'll bring to the table.
Thank you. Wlsnvey.
Yeah, so my name is Wlsnvey Campos, running for state representative of Oregon House District 28. I work as the case manager for Family Promise of Beaverton. It's a transitional housing program that helps families experiencing homelessness to get into housing. And it's the work that I do that was essentially the catalyst for me having made the decision to run. I did have a number of different people in the community approach me about running for the seat when we started hearing the rumblings that Representative Barker wasn't going to run for re-election. But I didn't think it was actually something I was going to do until I had a day at work where I had one too many conversations with families about the lack of resources and solutions in the area. I had a day where I started the day out on the phone with somebody who by the end of the phone call knew that they were going to be sleeping outside because all of the organizations they had called, including ours, were at capacity. I ended that very same day with a mom breaking down in tears in front of me, asking me how she was supposed to put a roof over her children's head when she works 40 hours a week but only makes minimum wage. And she laid out those numbers for me. That meant she made a little over $1,700 after taxes. And market rent for a 2-bedroom last year was a little over $1,300. And unfortunately, I have conversations like this far too often in my day-to-day work. And so after she left, I sat at my desk feeling really angry and frustrated. And I thought to myself, what we need is change at a policy level. We need people that are on the front lines of the most pressing issues, but we also need people who have diverse lived experiences. I myself grew up in a low-income household from the age of 8 until I left for college. My family lived in a motel room because that's what we could afford. There were times in my life we had to go to the public library restroom to literally roll sheets of toilet paper to take home so that we could save $8 that week and put it towards bills. There was a lot that I saw growing up, and it's interesting, that toilet paper story that I share with you, I've been talking about throughout this campaign, because there were moments like that in my mind that just stuck. But it's interesting talking about it now, given the times that we're in. It has definitely, the lack of toilet paper, access to basic needs that we have right now for a number of our different communities are things that I can relate to. The struggles that people are experiencing right now are things that I myself have navigated, and I'm now helping families navigate in my day-to-day job. Right now it is clear in this pandemic, and knowing that our state is going to have a strong response, it's clear that we need leaders that are on the front lines of these issues, that understand what people are going through, the people that are being left behind. And in my day-to-day job, at the beginning of this month, I was taking calls from families who didn't know how they were going to pay their rent or their bills. And even though the eviction moratorium exists, when that's lifted, people are concerned about getting evicted at that point. And right now, in the middle of the month, I'm fielding calls of people who are struggling to access food, who are struggling to access diapers and wipes, basic necessities that a lot of us go to the store and just pick up without a thought. So I have that direct experience on the ground. I've volunteered in my community for many years. I have a track record of seeing a problem and working on that solution, and not only working on it, but being effective.
Great, thank you. And I think what we'll do is just kind of alternate between who goes first. So Wlsnvey, this is you to start out on. It's unknown just how much this pandemic and stay-home order will cost the state in tax revenue, or how long and deeply the economic impacts will cut. Can you give a couple ideas of what you think the legislature should do next to help individuals and businesses get through this economic crisis?
Absolutely. So you are absolutely right in that question. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what the economic impact is going to be. But what we do know is that people need cash in their pockets now. There are a number of different ways that we need to address the crisis that's going on. One is in making sure that there's some sort of rent relief for renters, as well as those who have to pay mortgages. And I go back again to, there's an eviction moratorium right now, but we, especially as an organization that is working in the midst of a housing crisis, are extraordinarily concerned that there's going to be an onslaught, a deluge of evictions in a few months. And we already have a housing crisis in Oregon. In the district itself, the Beaverton School District has the highest number of students experiencing homelessness in the whole state. And that is only going to get worse if we don't do something about it now. The problems that we're seeing right now existed before and are right now only being exacerbated. So we need to make sure that we're addressing the needs of renters, that we're addressing the needs of working people. We also need to make sure that we're providing relief for small businesses. I think the paycheck protection is a fantastic way of going about this. I'm also a strong advocate and supporter of the Oregon worker relief. There's a lot of folks that through the federal package are being left out of the conversation, are being left out of relief. Immigrant workers, for example, aren't going to benefit from any of that. So those are some of the ways that I believe we need to address this.
Great. And Alisa, do you want me to repeat the question?
Please repeat. Yes, please do that.
Sure. It's unknown just how much the pandemic and stay-home order will cost the state in tax revenue, or how long and deeply the economic impacts will cut. Can you give a couple of ideas of what you think the legislature should do next to help individuals and businesses get through this economic crisis?
Sure. So we need to think about the short term, but then we also need to think about the long term, right? Because we have to have a strategy in place. So I agree that we need to first deal with the people that are in crisis right now. We need to first help people put food on the table. I know the food banks are just overloaded at this point. We need to keep people in their homes without them accumulating debt. So I'm concerned about people, the moratorium on rents. But then in a few months, people are still going to be having a lot of problems. So I think we need to have robust rental assistance programs right now. And I agree that we need to help our immigrant workers, our undocumented workers who are not getting the federal assistance that other people are getting. And we need to help support small businesses as much as possible. And we need to have active dialogue with small businesses. So it's not enough for the legislator to just meet and come up with ideas. We need to really engage strongly with the business community to find out what specific help they need in order to get back on track, because this is a problem that will be with us for a really, really long time. And we also need to look at developing a robust job training program We have a lot of people who are unemployed right now. We have more people that will be unemployed. And one of the things that I was really aware of before this crisis happened is that there were certain industries like technology and manufacturing that were having trouble finding skilled workers. We can use this crisis as an opportunity to give people the skills that they need so that as our economy gets better, as we get out of this crisis, they'll have the skills that they need. And then we can't forget our healthcare needs. We have a lot of people right now, either without health insurance or with high deductible policies, and we need to do everything we can to make it easy for people to get the healthcare they need without them having to worry about a huge bill. Because with this virus, you can die if you don't get help right away. So we need to have a robust response with healthcare. We also need to make sure that our public health system is adequately funded. I have seen over the years a defunding of public health, and now we're seeing the consequences of that. So we need to make our public health response a big priority right now.
Great, thank you very much. So Alisa, this question goes to you first. Even with federal assistance, the needs of the state are going to far outstrip the resources that we have. What do you think, what philosophy or concepts should guide the legislature in developing its next budget? For instance, what priorities would you think should take precedence, and what priority or what needs should take a backseat?
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard, especially the question about what needs should take a back seat, because we have so many needs right now. So we're going to have to really be strategic. And instead of, I think a lot of times in this state, we get into these battles over, are we supporting healthcare? Are we supporting education? Are we supporting social services? And all of these really important areas that we all need, we end up having these battles, and we got to get away from that. So one of the things that we need to do is look at our tax structure, and we really need to take a good hard look at it to make sure that we get as much revenue as possible into our state so that we don't have social services and healthcare and education fighting for scarce dollars. So that's going to be really important. And then we also need to just carefully look at how we're spending our money and make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck. And instead of saying, we're going to throw $30,000 at this problem to fix it, to really analyze the money that different agencies need and ask hard questions about how they're spending their money. Then the other thing we can do is that there are certain programs that if we're running more effectively can actually save the state money. So for example, if we have really robust child abuse intervention and prevention programs, we will save the state money by having less children in foster care. If we have more robust crime prevention programs, we will save the state money by not having as many people in prison. And we also can't lose sight of the fact that certain types of assistance actually helps the economy. So for example, food assistance, food stamps help the stores that sell food. Building affordable housing helps the construction industry. It helps architects, it helps engineers. So we need to see how this is all linked together, that helping vulnerable people can also stimulate the economy.
Thank you. Wlsnvey, would you like me to repeat the question?
If you could, please.
Sure. Even with help from the federal government, the needs for Oregon are going to far outstrip the resources that it has. What philosophy or concepts do you think should guide the legislature in deciding what gets funding and what doesn't?
So I strongly believe that we should not be operating from a place of scarcity. And if we want to see Oregon's economy recover, we need to ensure that everybody has what they need in this time, like the Oregon Workers Relief Fund. But it's interesting, in this time, there are a number of policies that I have prioritized during my campaign, and those don't seem to have changed, but rather are, again, being exacerbated as issues. We need to make sure that we are expanding the Oregon Health Plan. I in the work that I do, I work with families who are literally experiencing homelessness. And so many of them can't access the Oregon Health Plan. The Oregon Health Plan is meant to serve low-income communities. It's meant to serve marginalized and vulnerable communities. And when families who are literally homeless can't access the Oregon Health Plan, there's clearly a problem with our healthcare system. I can also tell you that I myself don't have healthcare right now. It's the middle of a pandemic, and it's really odd to think that sometimes that I don't have healthcare. But like so many people, healthcare costs are extraordinarily high. Last year, I received a notification of a rent increase at my apartment, and my budget was already pretty tight, and so I had to look at where I was going to cut back. Healthcare was one of my biggest expenses, and because I am both young, I'm able to pay out of pocket for my most, and so it just made more sense for me to do that instead of paying on the marketplace. For a lot of people, that might have meant they would have lost their housing, that rent increase, or wouldn't be able to access healthcare at all. So we need to make sure that we are prioritizing funding healthcare and expanding the Oregon Health Plan. We need to make sure that we're prioritizing school funding, because we're seeing how important and critical our schools are to our families. For example, school lunches. So many of the families that I'm talking with right now are struggling with food because their children are dependent on the nutrition they receive from the schools. And so, you know, we just passed recently the Student Success Act, and we need to make sure that we're still prioritizing funding education and that we're being effective and equitable in where those dollars from the Student Success Act go, but continue to have a steady stream of revenue. And it goes back to me saying that we should not be operating from a place of scarcity. And we talk a lot about where we need to make cuts, if we should prioritize this over that. But we need to be looking at where more revenue is going to come in. And I strongly believe we need to take a look at our tax structure right now, which is incredibly inequitable. We have working people who pay more in taxes than some of our largest corporations. So we need to take a hard look at where that revenue is going to from, so we can look at these issues and fund them adequately. So housing, but also job employment, retraining, support for working families. A lot of these are priorities that I'm hearing from the families that I'm working with.
So back to you, Wlsnvey. So what would you do on the revenue front? I guess, you know, what are the corporate tax strategies that you see are a problem where working people are paying more?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a state that doesn't tax corporations the way in which others do, and this has been an issue, a pretty controversial issue within the state for a number of different years. And I will tell you that, I mean, I shared with you the Beaverton School District here having the rate of homelessness that it does, but we also in this district have some of the largest corporations in the state, and this district is emblematic of the inequality that exists. And so we need to make sure that our corporations are reinvesting into the community and that we are taxing them fairly and adequately so that we can have that revenue, and that we're taking more of the load off of working families.
Right. I'm wondering if you can just be a little bit more specific about what you'd want to see change.
Versus our current tax structure now. Right. So it would be in taxing our corporations, the way in which we want specific like numbers.
Well, you mentioned other states. So like, what are some of the strategies that you're seeing in other states that you think Oregon should be looking at more?
So in increasing in corporate investments in, say, particularly like education, there's much more that needs to be done to ensure that our tax system is equitable. We must close corporate tax loopholes and pass other complementary tax policies that address our inequitable property tax system as it exists right now. That's one of the things that when I'm talking to voters on the phone is one of the first things that they ask about and that they address, and they want to know like why their property taxes are so high and why we're not taxing corporations. at the rates that we should be. There are documented cases of a property owner paying only 38% of the property taxes paid for by a similarly situated property owner in the same tax districts. That's not right. And those are the kind of things and tax loopholes that we must fix in this state.
And in terms of business taxes, one of the biggest differences between Oregon and other states is that we don't have a sales tax. Is that something that you would support?
That is a fantastic question. I think in terms of a sales tax, we've had a lot of controversy over that one as well, right? I think we need to take a hard look at first if our revenue can come from taxing corporations.
Okay. Right. Okay. And Alisa, over to you. What you mentioned a couple things that you would do in terms of the revenue front, in terms of savings, but are there changes in tax policy? I mean, do you think that there need to be other strategies employed, like a sales tax or something to capture more business tax revenue, or any other changes you would suggest?
Yeah. So again, I do think we need to look at our corporate tax structure. My understanding is that we're not taxing offshore profits in the way that we need to. So that may be one thing that we can look at to increase revenue. Excuse me?
For the state to do that.
For the state to do that, yeah. Yeah, the other thing, there are many things that we can do. One is to look at the kicker and see about keeping that kicker money for top earners. Because the way the kicker is structured right now, the majority of money that goes back to top earners. So if we can maybe relook at that and see if the people in maybe the top 10 or 20%, of income levels do not get the kicker back, that can help us. And then as far as, and there may be other options too, what I said earlier, we need to find a long-term strategy, get all the brain power in this state, all the people that have studied this for years, and develop a long-term strategy. But I do want to address the sales tax, because that's something that I've given a lot of thought to. I moved here 22 years ago, and I grew up in Maryland, I lived in Texas, and I lived in Minnesota before I came here. So before I came to Oregon, I had never lived in a place that did not have a sales tax. And I know for many Oregonians, people I've heard over the years, that's something that you just should not talk about. It seems to be kind of in the culture here. But a lot of people have moved to Oregon over the last 10 years or so from other states who were used to paying sales tax. And what's been interesting to me is since I've run for office, people have brought that up to me. A number of people have said, I think we need to start looking at a sales tax. I do think we should exempt food from the sales tax. We should exempt medications from the sales tax. But I do think that option needs to be on the table, and I do think it's something that Oregonians may be more receptive to than they have in the past. The other thing I think we can look at is some targeted sales taxes. So for example, there's going to be a ballot measure to be voted on in November to increase the cigarette tax to pay for health care. And I think that's a great way to raise revenue, because you're raising taxes on something people shouldn't be doing anyway, and that just, that will not affect the greater good at all. And you're raising revenue for healthcare. So we may want to start with some targeted sales taxes on certain items, and then look more broadly to see how that could work here. I do think that if we do have a sales tax, we should make sure that it is significantly lower than Washington's and Californian sales taxes, because we do get business from people from those states who want to come here and take advantage of buying things without a sales tax. So I would encourage, if we did it, that we keep it relatively low.
Great, thank you.
Lauren,
yes.
Can I go back to the sales tax
Absolutely.
question for a second? And maybe it's because I'm hearing different things when I'm having conversations with voters in the district. I'm not hearing that the desire for the sales tax is there. And at the end of the day, working families have paid more than their fair share, and we need to ensure that this burden doesn't fall on families. A sales tax can easily become regressive, and back to looking at that revenue not on the backs of working families.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing to that? Because I think I talked about targeted sales tax like on cigarettes, and we could also just have a targeted sales tax on high-priced items, so working families aren't impacted by a sales tax.
Thank you. Let's see. Actually, I'm sorry, Alisa, it's your turn to go first. Analysts have warned that the legislature's decision to delay repayment of the pension system's $25 billion unfunded liability would put the fund at greater risk in the event of a recession. Stocks have plummeted as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, and we are almost certainly in a recession now. What, if anything, do you think we should do to tackle this public finance crisis?
And are you talking about PERS?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Just wanted to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Yeah, PERS has been an interesting issue to follow all of the years that I have been in Oregon. And I know lots of modifications have been made to PERS over the years. And I'm really concerned about the way that we've handled the situation. Again, pitting, retirees, public employee retirees benefits against other things. Again, which is why I think we need to have a broader strategy in order to meet our obligations. Because it's not effective. We chip away at the retirement benefits of public employees, and public employees aren't happy, and then the people that don't like the PERS system still aren't happy, and we waste a lot of valuable time in the legislature doing this. So again, we need to really look at a long-term strategy of how to increase revenue into this state, and I don't think chipping away at the benefits for public employees is the way to go about that.
So you wouldn't make any changes moving forward in terms of what future employees or future benefits that employees earn?
No, I wouldn't.
Great. Wlsnvey, analysts warned that the legislature's decision last year, yes, to delay repayment of the pension system's $25 billion unfunded liability would put the fund at greater risk in the event of a recession. Stocks have plummeted, and we're almost certainly in a recession now. What, if anything, do you think we should do to tackle this public finance crisis?
So where I stand on this issue, whether it's in a good time in the economy or whether it's in a recession, is that PERS is not a slush fund. It is not a rainy day fund. It is a promise that we made to workers, and I stand by that. We need to make sure that revenue is coming in not on the backs of working families.
Okay. When you say that it's not a rainy day fund, I mean, it's not, the money in the PERS fund isn't available for education or anything along those lines. So I guess I'm wondering, can you, talk a little bit more about, I guess if you think that there is anything that should be done to make sure that the fund stays solvent, and as a legislator, what any reforms you would look at or any changes?
I wouldn't look at reforming the PERS system. I don't. Again, not a fund that's there to be used for other things, or given.
Right. It's okay.
I guess what we're getting at here is when it goes unaddressed, there are complications for schools, for social services. So we're not saying use the money. When we ask these questions, we're not asking whether you think the money should be used for other things, but to make sure that state funding that should be flowing to classrooms, to social services, to all these things both of you have said are very important to you, are not being diverted as they are to the fund to the extent that they currently are. So I just want to clarify that point in that question. It seemed like maybe that wasn't clear.
Okay.
So I would just say we need to look at the full picture when it comes to this, right? Where you're going is I think complex. No one has one solution, and it's going to take working with every state agency, looking across the budget spectrum. It's why it's so important that lawmakers are willing to work together, and we know that that's something that right now our legislature is struggling with, as our last legislative session indicated. But at the end of the day, my priorities and my values will be in supporting working people and keeping our promise to them.
Okay, thank you. And I think, Wlsnvey, you go first on this one. Would you support moving forward with a cap and trade program in the 2021 session? Or I should say cap and trade legislation in the 2021 session?
Absolutely. I think that the Democrats bent over backwards to try and address the issues that we saw the first time, and so 100% will support it.
And Alisa, same question for you. Would you support moving forward with cap and trade legislation in 2021?
Yes, and I'm pleased that the governor took executive action after the Republicans were trying to totally sabotage the legislation. And I think we need to do everything that we can to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and that this is a great way to move forward on that.
Okay. Laura, do you have any questions you want to ask?
No, I do kind of want to come back to the PERS question, because it seems to me that it's been oversimplified, that it's a question of whether it's reform or nothing. And you recognize that we have seen these problems occurring in our schools, and there's a lot of people pushing right now to pull back on the corporate activities tax, which was seen as the way to help our schools because of the many years of low funding that we've seen there. What do you think in terms of any change that should be made to the CAT now that we are obviously going into what could be several years of economic recovery? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think it should be changed at all? And I've lost track, I'm sorry, of who's first.
Lisa.
Yeah. So it's a very difficult issue, and it's something that I've been giving a lot of thought to. And here's the challenging part about all of that. I think the Student Success Act is a phenomenal way. I mean, it was phenomenal for me to see, after looking for years of living in this community, being an advocate for school funding, and to see businesses and the schools come together. And they came together at a good time in our economy, so that made it easier. Schools are going to need a tremendous amount of help going forward with all the kids that have been out of school for so long, and the inequities in our school system they're just going to be even bigger, because the kids from well-off families have been able to get their needs met a whole lot better than the kids from families who are not able to do in-home school. So there's going to be a whole slew of problems schools are going to have to deal with. I think they're going to have to we're going to have year-round school. We're going to have after-school programs, in order to get kids to catch up. So we need to figure out how to maintain that funding. So what I think needs to happen is we need to make sure that the funding is secure for schools, but I also think we need to have an open mind in discussions with the business community to see if they have any other solutions to how they can contribute to schools. And the corporate activities tax may be the way to go. And it may be that small businesses that are struggling right now may need to get extra assistance in order to pay that tax. It may be that people may have other ideas. But it's going to be tough. But it's going to take legislators that have relationships with the school community, that have relationships with the business community, that can navigate those relationships, and that will encourage dialogue between the two. Because we really need to keep that process of everybody working together to find solutions that work for us all.
Great. And Wlsnvey?
So I stand by protecting the corporate activities tax. I think now more than ever, we're seeing that we need to make sure the funding to our schools is still there. And that's where I stand on that issue. That's how we're going to put the economy back together again, is in supporting these families. And I think Alisa is correct. We need a legislator that has those connections, that has that experience of working and bringing people together. I'm proud to have worked on Measure 101, which was an effort between business and unions. And I'm also proud to every day in school just in addressing shortfalls that our communities are facing.
And I'm sorry, Wlsnvey, you cut out just a little bit at the end there. I don't know if you want to repeat a little bit of.
I just got a notification. Your internet connection is unstable. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Actually, why don't we move on to the next question, because it's connected to it. It's about education. Oregon's known for having trouble in terms of a low graduation rate, a high dropout rate. There have been a number of things adopted over the past few years to try to address that. And the Student Success Act was conceived as an idea to really get at some of the inequities in the educational system. Kind of recognizing that all school funding right now is in jeopardy. Are there other strategies that you think the state should be looking at to better serve students who have been left behind by the current system? Any ideas to better target underrepresented groups, students of color, students who speak English as a second language, to make sure that they are benefiting from a strong public education? And Wlsnvey, you'd be first.
Absolutely. So I think there are a number of ways of addressing those shortfalls, and unfortunately, a lot of the barriers that families face to education falls a lot on our schools. So we need to make sure, first of all, that our schools have the adequate funding to have support workers, assistants in the schools, counselors, social workers. But we also need to make sure that we're addressing the issues that make it more difficult for families to be successful in school, like the housing crisis. I have worked with a number of different families, one of whom fit 7 people into a small Toyota Corolla. And for the students to be able to do their homework, they put all of their book bags under their car, and then one kid would get a chance to sit in the car and do their homework. And it makes it that much more difficult to excel in school if you don't have a stable place to live. So we have to make sure we're addressing housing. We have to make sure we are funding our mental health services. And again, it's all interconnected, and so much of it falls on our schools. So adequate funding for mental health services, adequate funding in addressing our childcare issues, and also and that's connected to making sure that through the schools we can have after school programming, that we're moving towards having universal pre-K. And so again, this is all looking at it holistically and making sure that a student is able to get to school, that we're funding the transit system. We have areas in this district where the bus comes only once an hour. If you are a single mom who has small children, and one of them in the morning is running around and doesn't want to put their pants on, and you miss the bus, you are late to work, you are late to dropping your child off. It just creates so many more barriers. And so we need to make sure that we're addressing the things that also affect a student's life outside of school, and not just expecting our teachers to pick that up.
Great, thank you. And Alisa, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I got it. So I agree that we need to make sure that families are financially stable, because when you're not financially stable, it causes stress on the whole family, causes stress on the kids, they act out in school. Also, when you don't have stable housing, you move around a lot. And one of the biggest risk factors for children in learning in school is moving from school to school and not having that stable relationship with schools and with teachers, and that causes them to fall behind. Nutrition, we know, is important, that it impacts brain development. The other thing is not just starting with preschool, but making sure that families have access to really high quality childcare when their kids are really, really young. Because research has shown that a ton of brain development happens between birth and 2. So we even need to start that young in helping families. But then there's a whole nother piece that's more strategic. About, I think it was 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, the Oregonian wrote this article that I saved because I thought it was fantastic. It was on how McMinnville has a 93% graduation rate. And they talked about services that they're providing for kids where English is a second language. They talked about this math program that they have that's been really, really successful. The reason I saved that article is because we need to develop a statewide strategy for helping improve our graduation rate. I don't think it should be left school district to school district. I think we need to look at best practices, what's working well in Oregon. If this McMinnville model is working well, how can we replicate it across Oregon? And that's how, in addition to all these other issues that we've talked about, we can increase our rate of graduation in a state.
Can I add just one more thing,
Mm-hmm.
mostly because it's gonna bug me if I don't?
Oh, sure.
And I mentioned this because I just had this conversation yesterday, and I'm getting calls from families asking us if our organization can help them access internet so that their children can do their schoolwork. We need to make.
I'm sorry, you're
talk
cutting
about
out.
our.
Can you try again? You just cut out for that section.
I was going to say, or I was saying that we need to make internet a public utility in the state if we want to talk about our children being successful. I myself, growing up in a low-income household, did my homework, grew up doing my homework at the public library on their computers. And it made it hard sometimes when I had a project due late at night and the library closed at 8. And there's so many students that have these experiences. And right now in this pandemic, it is incredibly clear that everybody needs to have access to internet to be successful in their education.
Thank you. Laura, do you have anything else you want to ask?
No, I don't, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to hop off. I have an 11:30 call that I'm late for, but I wanted to say thank you so much. And if you have another question, feel free, and I don't want to end us too early, but I have to hop.
Sure.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your time.
Thank you.
And I think actually I'm pretty much all set. So thank you both for joining us today. This was really helpful. I will follow up with any other questions that I have, but otherwise I expect that we'll be coming out with our endorsements at the first week of May. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Helen.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.